On my wedding day, my father threw a tattered, old savings book at my feet and screamed, "Garbage belongs with garbage," in front of 200 guests. He wanted to humiliate me, to remind me one last time that I was nothing more than a mistake he'd spent 20 years trying to ignore. I thought that book was just a final insult until I walked into the bank in my wedding dress and the teller turned pale. She didn't see an old book, she saw a secret my mother had died to protect, and she was about to reveal that the garbage I was holding was actually a billion-dollar legacy that would strip my father of everything he loved. Growing up in the shadow of a man like Richard Vance meant learning how to disappear before you were even noticed. My name is Amelia, and for most of my life, I was the human equivalent of background noise. My mother died when I was barely 3, and from that moment on, I wasn't a daughter to my father, I was a living, breathing reminder of a loss he couldn't control. My father was a man who measured the world in profit margins and power plays, and I was a line item that simply didn't add up. He remarried quickly to a woman who saw me as an obstacle to her own children's inheritance, and together, they perfected the art of making me feel like a guest in my own home. Nobody talks about this particular pain, the slow, rhythmic heartbreak of being unwanted. It isn't a sudden blow, it's 1,000 small cuts. It's the empty seat at the school play, the birthday gifts that were clearly bought by an assistant, and the way the room goes quiet when you walk in. I grew up in a mansion that felt like a mausoleum, a place where the only warmth came from my grandmother, Evelyn. She was a woman of iron and lace, the only one who looked at me and saw a person instead of a problem. She would sit with me in the attic, her hands gnarled by time, and tell me that my mother had a plan for me. I thought she was just telling me fairy tales to keep me from crying. The day of my wedding to David, a kind man who loved me despite my family, not because of them, was supposed to be my escape. I stood in the foyer of the country club, my lace train catching on the floor, when Grandma Evelyn pressed a small, worn savings book into my palms. Her eyes were bright with a secret she'd kept for 2 decades. "This is yours, Amelia. It's from your mother. Don't let him see it." But my father, always the hunter, was already there. He snatched the book from my hands, his face contorting with a familiar, ugly disdain. He didn't even open it. He just saw the frayed edges and the faded ink, the garbage of a past he'd tried to bury. In front of my new in-laws and every socialite in the city, my father threw that book into the mud at my feet. He told me I was exactly like the trash my mother left behind. I picked up that book, not for the money I thought wasn't there, but to protect the only piece of my mother I had left. I had no idea that within 60 minutes, that trash would make the most powerful man in the state beg for my forgiveness. The reception hadn't even started when I slipped out. I was still in my wedding gown, the hem stained with the mud from the club's parking lot. I didn't go to my honeymoon, I went to the main branch of the First National Bank, the place listed on the cover of the savings book. I stood in the lobby, a bride in white among the businessmen in gray, looking like a woman who had lost her mind. I just wanted to know if there was enough for a plane ticket, enough to truly disappear from Richard Vance's reach. I reached the teller, a woman around my age, and handed her the book through the glass. "I'd like to check the balance, please," I whispered, my voice sounding small in the vast, marble lobby. The teller took the book, her expression bored until she scanned the account number. Her eyes widened. She typed something, then deleted it, then typed it again. She looked at the book, then at me, then back at the screen. The blood drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She didn't say a word, she just stood up, her chair screeching against the floor, and signaled to a man in a suit in the back office. Nobody talks about the pain of the silent struggle, the years spent wondering why you aren't enough, only to realize that the world has been keeping a different version of the truth from you. The manager approached, his face a mask of professional shock. "Mrs. Amelia Vance?" he asked, stumbling over my name. "Please, follow me. We need to go to the private vault immediately." "And ma'am?" "We've been instructed to notify the board of directors the moment this account was activated." As they led me past the velvet ropes, I realized this wasn't about a few $1,000s left over from a life insurance policy. This was about a sleeping giant account that had been accumulating interest and assets for 21 years. My mother hadn't left me a savings book, she had left me a controlling interest in the very bank my father was currently trying to take a massive, career-saving loan from. Inside the private room, the manager laid out the documents. My mother, Sarah Sinclair Vance, hadn't come from the nothing my father claimed. She was the secret heiress to the Sinclair shipping fortune, a legacy she had hidden from Richard because she'd seen the greed in his eyes before I was even born. She knew that if he knew about the money, he would use it to destroy her. So, she'd placed everything, the land, the ships, the stocks, into an ironclad trust for me, with my grandmother as the sole trustee until my wedding day. The savings book was merely the key, a physical trigger that proved I had reached the age of majority and was safe from my father's influence. Nobody talks about the pain of realizing your mother's love was a tactical war against your father. It's a relatable heartbreak to know she couldn't stay to protect you, so she built a financial fortress instead. The balance on the screen was a number I couldn't even process. It was billions. But more than that, it was leverage. The Sinclairs owned the land under my father's manufacturing plants. They held the debt on his latest expansion. They were the bank. While my father was standing at my wedding reception, bragging about his trash daughter, I was sitting in a vault realizing that I could end his career with a single signature. I looked at the mud on my dress and thought about every time he'd called me a burden. Every time he'd told me I was lucky to have a roof over my head. The silence in the vault was the first peace I'd known in my entire life. I wasn't the unwanted child anymore, I was the owner of the world he'd spent his life trying to conquer. The manager handed me a phone. "Your father's CFO has been calling every 10 minutes, ma'am. He's desperate for the loan approval." What should I tell them? I didn't want the money to buy things, I wanted it to buy the truth. I told the manager to set up a meeting for the following morning, but I didn't want his CFO. I wanted Richard Vance himself to walk into that boardroom and realize that the garbage he threw in the mud was now his landlord, his lender, and his boss. The following morning, Richard Vance walked into the Sinclair boardroom with the arrogance of a man who thought he was about to be saved. He was flanked by his lawyers, complaining about the delay in his funding. He didn't see me at first. I was sitting in the high-back chair at the head of the table, the seat my mother should have occupied. When I swiveled the chair around, the look on his face wasn't just shock, it was a total system failure. He looked at me, then at the nameplate on the desk, then back at me. "Amelia? What is this? What is this prank?" he barked, his voice lacking the usual bite. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply pushed the old savings book across the polished mahogany table. "Garbage belongs with garbage. Right, Dad?" I asked. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as his lawyers scanned the trust documents, their faces turning the same pale shade as the bank tellers. They whispered the words majority shareholder and immediate foreclosure into his ear. Nobody talks about the pain of the unprotected child, the one who had to grow up in a house where no one was in their corner. It is a silent struggle to remain calm when the person who broke you is finally at your mercy. I told him the truth, that my mother had planned this the day I was born. That she'd seen his true nature and ensured he would never touch a cent of the Sinclair fortune. I told him that I was calling in every loan, every debt, and every favor he owed. By the end of the week, the Vance name would be a footnote in history, and the house I grew up in would be a public park in my mother's name. He tried to play the family card, begging for a chance to reconnect, but he was talking to a woman he'd destroyed years ago. I walked out of that room without looking back, but I wasn't done. I had one more person to see, the one who had carried the weight of this secret while watching me suffer. I went back to the old house one last time to find Grandma Evelyn. She was sitting in her usual spot, but her face didn't look drained anymore, she looked triumphant. I realized then that her silent struggle had been the hardest of all, watching her granddaughter be treated like trash for 20 years, knowing that $1 billion legacy was just out of reach. She had stayed in that toxic house just to ensure the savings book reached my hands. She was the one who had truly saved me. The money didn't change who I was, but it changed what I no longer had to tolerate. I paid off my grandmother's medical bills and moved her into a home where the sun actually reached the windows. I set up scholarships in my mother's name for girls who, like me, had been taught to shrink themselves to fit into a man's world. I built a life with David that wasn't fueled by fear or silence. I stopped disappearing. Nobody talks about this pain, the belief that you are worthless because the people who were supposed to love you failed to do so. We live in a world that often mistakes quietness for weakness and poverty of spirit for a lack of value. But Amelia's story is a reminder that what others call garbage is often just a truth they are too afraid to face. Your worth is not determined by the people who cannot see it. Healing begins when you realize that you were never unwanted, just unprotected. Sometimes, the very things that are meant to humiliate you are the keys to your liberation. Don't be afraid to pick up what they throw in the mud. There is a sleeping giant inside of you, too, a legacy of strength and truth that no one can take away once you finally decide to stand up. I kept the savings book, Amelia whispered, looking at her mother's grave. Not for the billions, but for the proof. Proof that I was loved before I even knew what love was.
Counting the stars through the endless night. Your ghost walks with me in the empty sound. I lost myself where love was found. The wind whispers secrets it'll never tell, like the echoing ache of a broken shell. Your smile lingers like a gentle flame, but the silence now whispers